Hello, everyone. I am Jeff Levin, one of the co-chairs of the Marblehead SEPAC, and I am thrilled to be here with Jenn Schaeffner to ask her a few questions about her candidacy for the Marblehead School Committee. But before we do that, welcome, Jenn. What would you like to tell us about yourself?
Briefly, candidate running for school committee. I served on the Marblehead School Committee from 2016 to 2020. Grew up in Marblehead, attended Marblehead Public Schools, as did my children. Had moved back here after growing up here in 2003, and was pretty active as a parent volunteer for many years in almost every PCO or PTO building in town. And then I was co-chair of what was CCOM at the time, which is CPAC now, for 4 years, and culminated with a school committee run and served from 2016 to 2020. Have been busy for the last year or so, having co-founded Marblehead Beacon, which is a local digital news source focused on accountability and transparency in our local government, and really decided into the late winter, early spring this year that it would be an appropriate time for me to run for school committee again. So I appreciate your consideration and ask for your vote on June 20th.
Awesome. Well, welcome. What would you say are the 2 to 3 most important issues the school committee will need to address over the next few years? And what unique perspective or skills would you bring to help the committee address them?
So I think that as far as the next couple of years are concerned, the first really would be getting a handle on the school budget. It's really been for the last 4 or 5 or even longer number of years. There's been tremendous pressure on the town budgets, but specifically the school district budget. So I think that really needs to be the focus, so that we're not constantly trying to fill a structural deficit. And last year there was an attempt to do an override, which didn't pass. This year, the school committee has come back again asking for an override, which will hopefully pass on June 20th. But I feel strongly that it's time to really go back and do a zero-based budget approach to our school district in our school budget. Because every year that I've been following for over 20 years, we do what's called level services funding. So we look at what we offered last year and how much it cost. We add on our contractual increases, which are primarily around the teacher and staff contracts and other things that go up in cost, including out of district placements. And we add that to our budget, and we ask the town to appropriate that money. We've never actually gone down building by building to scratch and said, okay, this year, we should do it every year. This year, who are the students in each building? What do they need for staff, for faculty, for services? What does the building need? And what administrative service do they need? And build the budget that way. And when we do that, we will get a true number. And that's something that we need to start this year. And once we've built the structure for it, we can continue to do that year over year without having to recreate the wheel. That's the first priority. Second priority really is to focus on learning loss. And it's learning loss for all of our students, because we've seen that in the results. Some of it, or a lot of it, is due to, we believe, or the professionals believe, due to loss during the pandemic. But I think we were also starting to see that beforehand, and the tremendous pressures and social pressures we have on our students, all students. So we really need to be focused on the learning loss, and I believe the culture. They go hand in hand. We need to create a culture in our school district of acceptance, of inclusivity, of equality, and of rigor and achievement, both academically and socially.
Thank you, Jenn. I'd love to go a step further on budget, because the budget challenges, as you alluded to, have been front and center for this town and the schools for a number of years. And regardless of how the vote goes, will likely remain front and center. Special education budgets are complex and are often unfairly blamed for consuming general education resources. What can we do differently to build greater consensus amongst the community to manage budgets in a way to support all of our students?
Well, to your point, Jeff, I agree. It has always felt to me, particularly being the parent of a child with special needs and having chaired CCOM or CPAC for several years, that there has in the past been sort of an us and them type of environment, if you will. I don't have students in the district now, so while I have been covering the school district and I am still in touch with a lot of leaders, I'm not a parent there, so I can't say from firsthand experience what's going on now, sort of culturally in regards to that. But it seems to me, with the increase in the number of students, regular education students, who are really struggling socially, emotionally, and academically, because we're seeing all students drop in their scores and their standardized tests, and we're seeing a learning loss across all of our students. Perhaps that wall is beginning to crumble a bit as parents of students who are not diagnosed with a disability are seeing their students struggle and are experiencing what we as parents with children with disabilities have always experienced. So, do we wish this learning loss and this pandemic on us again? Of course not, but there have probably been some learning that has come out of that, particularly for the adults in the community. That being said, we have a tremendous number of students. I've seen estimates between 23 to 28% of the students in Marblehead on IEPs. And so that's certainly higher than it was, pre-COVID. So it is and continues to be a reality of our school budget. So from my perspective, we have a student body of 2,600 approximately students that all have individual needs and that they need to be met. Some have diagnoses, some have IEPs that have a bit of a higher level of scrutiny on the services delivered, but all of our students deserve an excellent education and deserve for their needs to be met. And I feel very strongly about that. So from a budget perspective, couple of things. We've heard a lot about declining enrollment over the last really 7-8 years. Looking back over the last couple of years, no, we don't see a big drop. But going back to, I think the peak was 2017, highest we had around 3,200 students. So we have seen a drop in enrollment, and that was projected by the MSBA when we were doing our letters of interest and statement of interest for the Brown School. So it's not a big surprise as far as that's concerned, perhaps exacerbated to some degree by the pandemic. But with this drop in enrollment, it doesn't seem necessarily to be changing and going back up. We have an opportunity to look at our budget and make sure that we are maximizing every dollar that is appropriated to us from the town. We've seen our enrollment drop. We haven't seen our budget drop, right? So the town hasn't said, because you have 500 less students, we're going to give you that amount of money less. That has not been the case, but our costs have risen. So it's not that the costs have stayed still, they haven't. And the costs of students with special needs has also gone up, particularly around transportation and out of district placements that have been a form of pressure on our budget for many years now. And I think we're going to cover that in a future question. But suffice to say, we have a responsibility and obligation to maximize every budget dollar, which is what I intend to do, so that our students are able to maximize their achievement, all of our students.
Thank you. Yeah, let's talk about out of district placement. What steps do you think the district can do or even should do to broaden the services provided in Marblehead schools so that we can reduce the number of out of district placements each year?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One I've thought about for years. Honestly, I have. And I'm not a professional educator. I'm not a professional administrator. I don't have a degree in special education. And I understand and appreciate the complexity of this from a management perspective, administrative perspective, educational perspective, family perspective, and student perspective. So we have an obligation to educate our students so that they are making significant progress. And when we don't, when we can't, when we're unable to do that or don't do it, then we have an obligation to place them in an educational institution that can meet their needs, and we have seen that happen on an increasing basis over the last number of years. So the answer is, for students that have needs that we should be able to meet with proper recruiting, hiring, training, and administration, and have them stay in district with special educators and regular educators that can meet their needs, we ought to be able to do that. And that really comes down to an administrative responsibility and obligation. And that's something that, while that's not the purview of the school committee can work with the administration to focus on that as a priority. So while we may not necessarily bring students back, we talk about that a lot, that's really, that's tough, right? Because that's an individual student with the family and what's best for that student. But what we ought to be doing is building strong, rigorous, robust programs so that we keep more of our students in district and prevent them from being sent out of district.
Thank you. The district's approach to inclusion, which includes the available programs, the support structures in each of the schools, varies considerably. What role can and should the school committee play in driving greater uniformity across the district in terms of inclusion? And how would you measure success or define success with inclusion?
So again, a very complex subject, very complex structure for combining regular education, special education classrooms, K through 12, because they look very different at different levels between elementary, upper elementary, middle, and high school. But inclusion is the, sort of the state of the art goal, if you will, for all students. But it's not easy to achieve it, first of all. One thing I think we need to really make sure we're doing is we're being transparent about what inclusion models we are having in our schools right now and what our staffing is, because I don't think that that's been clear. I really don't. I think there's been all this discussion around teacher ratio, student ratios, the budget, average teacher salaries, and not really sort of talking about the glue between all of that, which is that it's the inclusion model, because the inclusion model explains a lot of those, sort of questions, and that we're staffing so that we're maximizing the inclusion as much as we possibly can, which I think is important. I mean, we're always going to have students that have needs that we can meet in district, but can't necessarily access regular education at all during the day or for the entire day. So there are always going to have to be some substantially separate classrooms, but hopefully we're working towards that to be sort of de minimis, and that we're really trying to meet their needs in a regular education inclusive classroom with all of their peers. Your question to me about how to measure that, I'm going to throw it back to you and to SEPAC and to the administration. Honestly, I don't know. And I've been asking that question since 2016 when I got on the board. What is the model for a successful inclusion program in a public education system, pre-K to 12? And how do you measure it? We have standardized testing, right? So we can measure that, but we continue to see our special needs students, score differently. And in a lot of cases scored lower than regular education students. And they are considered, a special group. But MCAS, as we all know, is not the answer to everything. And I think that that's a priority that the school district, the administration, the school committee need to work together to determine what is the measurement for success, because I don't believe that we have one or a model for what we're measuring for successful inclusion. And that's a shame, because we're staffing for it, we're allocating resources towards this, we're putting our students in these classrooms, our special education students in these classrooms, and I'm not sure we have the roadmap as to what is the definition of success. So I'm sorry, I don't necessarily have the answer for that, but I think it's time for us to find that answer.
Well, that's an answer in its own right. I appreciate the honesty and transparency in the challenge, frankly. So we've talked about a number of challenges that we're facing. What would you say are your special education priorities, and how do you plan on advocating for them?
So the special education priorities are part of education priorities, right? Because the special education and regular education, again, if we embrace this inclusion model, are all together, and we need to be thinking that way, that we are one school district with one group of students, and they all have different needs, and we need to meet those needs. The reality, as I talked about earlier, is that students that are on IEPs have rights and deservedly so for services that they need to access their education and their curriculum, and we need to provide that. So again, it goes back to zero-based budget every year, looking at every building with the administration, both the the building administration and the student special services administration, and say, all right, for every student we have, what do they need? How many substantially separate classrooms do we need? How many aides do we need? How many paras? How many tutors? What does our inclusion model staffing look like based on the needs of the students? How are we allocating our classrooms this year? And then building up, building by building, to create the budget that we need to meet those needs. As I said in my earlier question, we need to figure out a roadmap as to how we're going to measure success. We have standardized tests. We also have the iReady system that's been implemented. I believe that standardized tests have a place, but they're not the answer as to how you measure success. And I think we need to work collaboratively to figure out what is our report card for all of our students, including special education students. What do we want a graduate of Marblehead High School to look like, to be able to do, to be able to succeed going out into post-graduation? And that is absolutely a priority, because we have a responsibility as a school committee to maximize the budget dollars to create this environment for student achievement.
Jenn, thank you so much for your honesty and for your time today. Before we close out, anything you want to share with the audience?
I appreciate SEPAC. I appreciate your taking the time to do this. I know we all have day jobs, and it takes time out of our day to do that. I appreciate the time that the other candidates have put in as well. I think that this campaign season has been actually far more pleasurable than it has been in the past, because I think we've really been talking about the issues that are facing our school district. I think if each of us bring different things to the table and have different ideas, but I am focused on maximizing our students' achievement, regaining our learning loss, and creating a culture, as I said in my opening statement, of inclusivity, of kindness, of acceptance, of tolerance, that allows every student to be the best that they can be when they graduate out of our system. And I'd also like, as a goal, to educate all the students in Marblehead. We've had some loss. We've had students who've gone off. We always have, a certain number of students who choose to go to school elsewhere. But I'd like to really be a school district that the people of Marblehead and the parents of Marblehead are proud to send their students to and have their students graduate from.
Beautiful ending. Thank you. Thank you, Jenn.